Oh boy, this is going to be one of those ones that gets people mad. Hi all, let's talk silent protagonists. If you play a lot of video games, there's a chance you've taken control of one of these weird, quiet boys. These are characters that don't talk. These are characters that don't express themselves. These are silent protagonists. Characters that barely have any lines, barely have any character interactions, but are beloved. And honestly, I find this fascinating. Silent protagonists are something that is so intrinsic to the medium of video games. And it's something that exists from the early NES days, when having a bunch of text was too much for games. This was back when games didn't really have stories, you just kind of played them. But with the Super Nintendo, the idea of the silent protagonist started to really take form. It became less of a limitation and more of an artistic choice. The idea has always been silent protagonists exist so that the player can put themselves in the character's shoes. The idea is that the silent main character is an observer, much like the player playing the game. By not adding dialogue, developers argue that it helps us feel more like the main character. And I just think this is the stupidest argument. Dialogue, interaction, and inner monologue all are essential to creating great characters, and great characters make great stories. When narrative matters in your video game, it is a mistake to have a silent protagonist. Dialogue, whether voice or just text, gives us an idea of who our characters are and who our main character is. It gives us something to latch on to, relatable characteristics that make us like the main character and become invested in their journey. We need a reason to care about our protagonist. Interactions and dialogue are a fantastic way to do that. Probably the best example of this is the original Dead Space versus the 2023 remake. When the original Dead Space released in 2008, the main character, Isaac Clarke, did not talk at all. It led to a weird situation where you played as this weird mute guy, and there were people that would contact you over the radio and just bark commands as you tried to fix the USG Ishimura. Cut to 2023 and Dead Space Remake released. In this, developer EA Motive made the creative decision to make Isaac Clarke a voiced character, and the game is better for it. The reason why it works so well and why the silent protagonist didn't work in the original Dead Space is because the narrative of Dead Space hinges on Isaac Clarke's mental state. The narrative wants to show us how going through a traumatic experience through this haunted spaceship can warp a person's sense of reality. But in order for this to work, you 1, have to care about Isaac, 2, you then have to see how he changes as he dives deeper and deeper into the USG Ishimura. One way they do this in Dead Space Remake is through the dialogue with your companions over the radio. By allowing Isaac to speak in the 2023 remake, we see what he is experiencing. The player can understand the journey from the beginning of the game to the very end. Dead Space's narrative was not effective in 2008. It had a cool little twist at the end, but really it didn't mean much. Ultimately, this was largely because Isaac was a silent protagonist. We didn't care about him, his journey, or his mental state, because we didn't know what was going on with him as he was progressing through the story. But in 2023, the narrative is more effective, and it is scarier because we see Isaac's reactions to things as they happen on screen. He's a better analog for the player when he can react to things and the player can relate to what he is feeling in any given moment. Another great example of a silent protagonist that simply just doesn't work is Chrono Trigger. The famous JRPG has a silent protagonist in its main character of Chrono. Famously, Yuji Horii, the creator of Dragon Quest, gave the development team this advice. He said, "The protagonist of an RPG should never speak." The development team was split on this issue, and ultimately they went with a silent protagonist. And hot take, this was a mistake for Chrono Trigger. The problem is, in the context of Chrono Trigger, Chrono not speaking is very weird. The entire narrative hinges on Chrono assembling a team across time to take on an outer space deity. Much like many other JRPGs, the narrative hinges on the party coming together, growing together, and becoming friends as they tackle this otherworldly beast. The problem is, when our main character, Chrono, says nothing to the other party members, the overall relationship between these characters is damaged in some way. This is a problem because turn-based RPGs live and die by their party members and their narrative. You're on this grand adventure, watching this cast of characters grow and come together, and your lead doesn't speak. It's very strange. It'd be like if you watched Lord of the Rings and Aragorn and Frodo were silent the entire time. The movie would be actively worse. They wouldn't feel as close with the other characters, and their development would have to be told rather than shown. In Chrono Trigger, Chrono being a silent protagonist stands in the way of the party developing into a compelling team. Our lead is this boring, quiet guy that's surrounded by vastly more interesting characters. It's also really weird because Chrono Trigger's story relies on you caring about the character of Chrono. There's this crucial story beat that happens halfway through that relies on you caring about Chrono, and it doesn't hit as hard because we don't hear him speak. We don't know who this person is. He's just an analog for us, the player. We should care about this spiky-haired dude because we've been playing as him, but that's very superficial. We should care about Chrono as a person rather than just him as an avatar for us. Look, I love Chrono Trigger, but I can't help thinking that the story would be actively better if Chrono actually talked and interacted with the other party members. Breath of the Wild would be better if Link spoke. I know, pitchforks down, let me explain. Breath of the Wild does something very interesting with the Zelda story. Rather than just being a traditional hero story, Breath of the Wild is all about failure and overcoming past failure. Link and the champions fail to stop Ganondorf. Link dies and gets resurrected. When he does so, his entire world that he knows is gone. He has slept for over 100 years. The game is about traversing this empty post-apocalyptic world, and places are constantly reminding Link that he failed against Ganondorf. The game literally has cutscenes where Link meets his dead friends and comforts Princess Zelda. And guess what? Not a peep. Breath of the Wild is weird because it clearly wants to take the Zelda story forward. It wants to be different from previous Zelda games and tell a slightly darker story about a hero who failed, but it's too scared to actually commit because Link is a silent protagonist. In Breath of the Wild, his failure and the stakes against Ganondorf are lower than it should be, and I feel this because the narrative of Breath of the Wild would have been far more compelling if Link actually talked, whether it was in text or spoken. Breath of the Wild ultimately wants to say something about failure and wants to do something different with Zelda's story. But when your main character, the person who's impacted most by that failure, doesn't reflect on it, doesn't talk about it, it's just kind of hard to care. As a longtime Zelda fan, I felt that Breath of the Wild specifically was disappointing due to its seemingly wanting to change up the formula, but not committing to a voiced protagonist. Look, I've been ragging on silent protagonists a lot, but I do think they're somewhat effective in some circumstances. A great example of this is 2016's Doom. The game isn't about Doom Guy. It isn't about his story or his emotions. There are no soliloquies about how he feels sad because the Earth is lost. Doom is about ripping and tearing. The game is good because Doom Guy is one-dimensional. All he cares about is killing demons, and he hates demons. Because Doom is an experience that you play for the gameplay, it's perfectly fine that it has a flat, silent character. I would say Doom 2016 would actually be worse if they gave Doom Guy a personality and voice lines. And you see this in Eternal and the Dark Ages. When Doom tries to commit to a story, it's just kind of boring. I also think the Souls games are a great example of a silent protagonist. Yet again, you have a gameplay-driven experience, but it also kind of works thematically. In Souls games, you're a teeny tiny cog in a much grander story about the end of the world and gods. The narrative focus is on these gods and lore. You play a tiny, insignificant silent knight that rises to the occasion. The silence of the player character in Dark Souls or Elden Ring helps to highlight their insignificance. It's done to illustrate that they are just one person that has walked the path of gods that many have. It also helps capture that feeling of loneliness that these games do so well. And practically, when you play Dark Souls and Elden Ring, you're doing it for the gameplay. A cutscene where the chosen undead goes to therapy would just get in the way. Ultimately, characters matter. When I'm watching a TV show or a movie or reading a book, I care less if the plot is unique and more if its characters are interesting. What I care about are character interactions and strong characters. This is what we latch onto within a story. These are relatable, fictitious humans that stick with us, help us reflect on our own experiences. When we control characters, we inherently get attached to them. But if your game has a focus on narrative and has a silent protagonist, that connection through play is not enough. Look, ultimately, I think silent protagonists have their place, especially in games where gameplay is the focus. I don't need to learn about Little Mac from Punch-Out's daddy issues, but more often than not, I feel like this trope of the silent protagonist is used to a game's detriment rather than enhancing it. It's fine. I mean, ultimately, there's a place for silent protagonists, but ultimately, I'd like to get to know a character. But hey, what do I know? Am I off base here? Let me know in the comments down below. Remember, this channel is home to stinky opinions. Love what you saw? Hate what you saw? Drop a comment down below. And why not subscribe if you enjoyed the show? Thanks for me, Stanky, the CEO.